The first thing you need to do is go to signalpattern.com and sign up. It's a very standard sign-up process that you're familiar with from other services. You will get an email asking you to verify the account, and once you're done with that, come back here and click on the login button and just log in with the new username and password you picked. It will come to your account homepage. Your page will initially be empty because you have no patterns that you've built yet, but those will fill up once you start making progress. There's a couple of different features here. My patterns is where we are now. My secrets will be where you put all of the authentication keys and so on for the APIs you want to use. On the right here you have a create new button for creating a blank canvas pattern, and then up here is a little search box which I'm going to start with. So what I'd like you to do is put in getting started, and it will bring up a number of options. The one I want to focus on is the first one here. It's called Getting Started Guide. The point I want to make about this document is that it is entirely written in Signalpattern. So this is a tutorial about Signalpattern written in Signalpattern, which is interesting. And it points to the fact that you can do lots of different types of things with Signalpattern, everything from creating a website or a blog like this to creating interactive applications. Signalpattern is based on the concept of a pattern. And a pattern is really just a document that you create in the editor and gets saved. Patterns are comprised of signals, and a signal is a unit of work, meaning it's an instruction that the editor uses to either display something or manipulate something or so on. All the different things you can do with signals are listed here, and we won't go through all of them, but I encourage you to look into these further in the documentation that we have. But the point is that you can do simple things, you can do complex things using all of the same types of concepts. Concepts mainly revolve around the idea that signals are like Lego, meaning they can be used individually or they can be combined to create more complicated outcomes. So the document here, which is a pattern, was written using Signalpattern. So what we can do is check out how it was built by clicking on the Edit button down here. You scroll back to the top here, you'll see now that there are two columns. The left-hand column is the input, and these are those rows that look like a little bit like cells in a spreadsheet, where you have the name of the cell here and then the instruction below it. And on the right-hand side is the output from that combination. And we'll get into all the different things you can do. You'll notice that there are some red sections here. The red and the sizing and all the different display options here come from a technology that we use called Markdown, which is very similar to HTML. It's very popular on the web. I won't go into how it's actually used, but you can find it on the web very easily. And you'll also notice that if you look carefully behind these signals, some of them have these dark stripes and some don't. The dark stripes indicate that this particular signal is not visible in view mode, and that's why you didn't see it when we first started. It's because it's invisible, and that characteristic is set. If you click this little eye here, you'll notice there's a number of things in here, but the one I'm paying attention to now, it says make visible or make invisible. So I'm saying make hidden. Okay, so that makes that section invisible in the view mode, but visible in edit mode. So that's what that is. As you scroll down, and if you study how these signals are laid up, you'll see that in some cases it's really just text with some markdown formatting, which shows up over here, and so on. And I think that you can build tables, you can build complicated layouts, but nowhere in here yet is an API call. So we'll get to that in a moment. But looking at how this is built, I think is instructive as a first step. What I'm going to do now is go to view mode and click continue. Okay, this pattern is more complicated, but not much. It uses the same markdown principles that we saw earlier to lay up the tables and the colors and so on. But in this case, what is a field that it asks you to put in the name Chuck Norris. So we'll put in the name Chuck Norris and see what happens. You don't have to hit return. It just happens automatically. So in this case, what's happening is we are making an API call to a provider called Giphy. And as its name implies, Giphy will return an animated GIF based on a search term. So we put in Chuck Norris. The instructions were to put in Chuck Norris, and you got this as an output. But you can put in anything. So here's a good example of this is a freeform text search. So I'll just put in, say, flower. And Giphy will give me back something else. I can put in another term, Monday. So anything you want, you put in, it'll return a random graphic. And maybe that's all you want to do, and then Signalpattern has made that easy. But you can do more complex things as well, things that involve multiple API calls that are chained together. So here's a good example. I'm going to put in my zip code, and you can put in your zip code or any zip code. And what it will do is it will give you the weather for that particular location plus a map. And this it looks like it's only 2 pieces of information, but there's actually a little more complexity going on there. And we'll get into that when we get into the edit mode. But the point is that from the user standpoint, they would just put in a little piece of information, and Signalpattern handled the gathering of the information and the presenting of it in an easy way. So let's check out how this was built. Click the edit mode button down here. So let's go back to the beginning and start with a fresh pattern, and I'll show you how you can start from scratch and get to this point. Then in a later section we'll jump more into working with APIs. Okay, so to get back to your account homepage, it's a little bit of a trick. You have to click the logo down here on the left, and then your account homepage name up here in the upper right. And once you've done that, you will see your account homepage again. In this case, though, hit Create New. Create New will give you a blank page, and here is where you will start typing information. So just keep it simple. Just type your name. So your name will show up in this field, but it'll also show up in the output section. Now what you can do is click, if you roll your cursor, as you start rolling down, and even in between signals, you'll notice a little line. You click on it, it'll open a new signal. And now here, put your last name. Okay, now you'll see those 2 signals. Now if you create a third signal, what I want you to do is combine your name into your full name. And the way you do that is by referencing the names in the sort of name section of the signal itself. So by default, they're given these sort of arbitrary IDs, but let's make them more useful. So just double click on it and say first, and double click on this one, say last, and then here we'll say full space name. And what I can do, there's 2 things I could do. One, I could, using double curly braces, that's how you identify a signal name. And sort of similar to how you do things in Excel, where you identify cell names by column and row. In this case, you just do curly brace open, and then I type in first, which is the name of the signal, and then I do a closing 2 curly brackets, and you'll notice it converts it into a nicer looking little label. And you'll also notice that it shows up here. So I'm referencing this signal down here with that label, and if I put so now anything I put in this part here will show up on the right. So first space, and then I say curly bracket last, end curly bracket. Okay, so now there's my full name, and I can keep going here just sort of so I can now say hi space curly bracket full underscore name, end curly bracket, right? So it's very simple, but it shows how you can very easily, reference other signals within a document. So now let's say, for example, I didn't want to do the curly bracket thing. I just wanted to drag and drop. You can do that too. I can go in here to the eye, click the eye, and you'll see there's a bunch of options. We won't get into all of them right now, but one of them says here. And what that means is that's the curly bracket label that you can just drag and drop into something else. If I click on it and drag it, I can just drag it down here, and then I don't have to type it. Hi, Peter Summelhack, see? So that's a real quick way of working with text. I can get rid of signals just by clicking on the red here, and I can move them by clicking on this little sort of hamburger looking thing here. But what I'm going to do now is just get rid of all these, because I want to show you something else. You can also work with numbers. So if I put in 100 here, create a new one, 2000, just like a spreadsheet, I can now add these together, or I can perform any of the different sort of manipulation functions, mathematical functions that we have, which are tons. So in this case, I won't bother changing the names of the labels, but I'll just say curly bracket S1, curly bracket times, open curly bracket S2, curly bracket. Right? So now I can do math, and you could imagine a signal where it would combine my name with my age, which is not 200,000 years, but you get the point, which is that you can manipulate text and numbers in a way that's both static and calculated, which is important because as you start working with APIs, how you manipulate the outcomes of the API calls is important. Okay, so let's now play with API calls and see how that works. I will get rid of these signals, and I'm going to use an API which is super simple. It's kind of funny. It's called the Chuck Norris Joke Generator API. There's no authentication or anything. All I have to do is take this API call right here, copy it, and I paste it into a signal. And you'll see is that we get a 200 in API land. A 200 means success. So if I hit expand all, you'll see all the outputs from the API, and you'll see the value we're looking for is Chuck Norris gave to charity, charity gave back, right? If I do another one, just give me another one, right? So what I don't want my application to show all this stuff here. All I really want is just the answer to the joke. So I can grab that little component, drag it to a line here. See the little plus sign shows up. Drop it, and you'll see that there is the answer. Chuck Norris dandruff has the same properties as finely crushed glass, right? So that's it. That's all I had to do. And if that's what I really want to do, let's say I want to make that a widget on a website, then I'm basically done. I can collapse this. Now, I don't want anybody to see all this stuff here, so I can hide it. So there's a couple ways I can do that. One, I can hide the output here, meaning if I go into view mode, I'll still see the get, which is probably a good thing. Or I could actually I could make this whole thing invisible by saying make hidden. The problem with that is that all you're going to get is the output and not necessarily a way to get a new one unless you refresh the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it visible, but I'm going to change the name from just get to something a little more interesting. So get new joke. Okay, and I can hide this. Now if I go to view mode, here's a joke, I click it again, get another one, and so on. Right, so that's a very simple example of just making an API call. And the next step will be doing something which is a little more advanced, because what we're going to do is get some information and display it in a different format, and then we will talk a little bit about authentication. Okay, so now we're going to try something a little different. I'm going to get rid of these. We're going to use a API called Dweet, which is an Internet of Things API. What it will do is it'll give the location and other information, latitude, longitude, for a device. So this is my phone, actually. And if I look at raw, here's the actual JSON output. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to do this. I'm going to go, and the Dweet homepage has the actual API call right here. It's very simple. So I'm going to take this, copy it, go back to Signalpattern, drop it in. Now what it needs is a thing name, which is sort of the identifier for the device. So I'm just going to put mine in here, which is decorous window. That is the name. Now you'll see if I expand this, here's all the information that you just saw, right? So here's the device. Whoops. Here's the device. Raw. So that's the information coming from the device. Here's the API call, so it's the same. But what I really want to know is the location of this thing. I don't really care about anything else, so I'm just say I'm going to drag, like I did before, my latitude. Now I need latitude and longitude, so I'm going to put latitude, then I'm going to put a comma, longitude. Okay. Now Signalpattern has lots of different display options, but one of the ones that it has, which is kind of neat, is the ability to do maps based on location data. So here's the latitude, longitude coming from the API. If I click on the eye, you'll see that there's an option here called Settings, and I can sort of change how things look. So I'm going to select Map. Right, so now what it's doing is it's giving me a map of that location. So that's pretty cool. Now, as before, I want to just be able to show a map and not show all the output from the API call itself, so I can hide the output. And so now, if I go to view mode, it'll just show me the map, right, for where that location, or that device's location. So that's just an example of how you can play with the different settings for signals to display things in different ways. So lastly, I want to show you how to work with Clarify. So you have to go, obviously, create an account. You'll have to create an application within the platform. So here's one I have called that Signalpattern Sandbox. And what you're going to want here is the key that gets generated. So here's the API key. And you copy and paste that. And you copy it, and I'll show you where to paste it. You go back to your account homepage. You do that by clicking on the little logo in the lower left, and then up here on the right you click on your homepage icon. And come in here and hit Secrets. What you can do then is type in what you want to call it. So Clarify API key. I'm not going to do it because I already have one. But then you just copy, or I'm sorry, you paste your value here and hit Create. And then what you'll get is one of these little colorful, we call them references. So you see that's the sandbox key there. You can copy and paste that any place within Signalpattern that you normally would be putting your key, because obviously you don't want to be having your key displayed, in any meaningful way, unless it's totally private, in which case it doesn't matter. But this is a great way to hide them and be able to share them. So if I now have that set up, I'll go back here and go into the Clarify pattern that I built. And we focused on your food model initially. I'm going to edit mode here. And so let's look at that. So here is the actual call. This is I copied this directly from your website. Now in here, when you do an API call with authentication and other sort of more complex parameters, you have things called query parameters, headers, and bodies, and so on. And so in this particular case, one of the headers is called authorization, and in here is you have to put the key. So I just copied and pasted that there. you have to have a header called content type, and that's the parameter there. You have a body, which if I open this up, you'll see you have to paste the body in here, and this gets a little more complicated, but the idea is that the body of the call requires an example of the food, in this case a URL for the particular item we're talking about. So that all takes place within the within this advanced section of the API. So in the past, when we were using Dweet or Chuck Norris,